All right, Dr. Amen, so good to see you again. Thanks so much for coming back on the Mark Divine Show. How are you, sir?
Hey, Mark. I am happy. How are you?
I am absolutely, I'm happy too, you know? Uh, Gosh, I haven't always been happy. Probably when I was younger, if you had given me a brain scan at 20, 21, you would have seen one of those gnarly brains. Anyways, we'll talk about that. So I'm glad you're happy. Thanks. In fact, we're going to talk about your book because right, this title, "You Happier," and that's a great goal to make people happier. But let's first kind of back up. We spoke a few years ago, and I'm curious. Like we talked about your life. You had a book out. One of the things we talked about was "Change Your Brain, Change Your Life," which is kind of one of your foundational works, right? That really got, from my perspective, I don't know if this is true from yours, but it's when I first heard about your work and got really interested in the fact that, because I've been approaching mental toughness and mental development from the field of training development, optimizing behavior, and all just kind of assuming that the brain was just kind of along for the ride. That it was all about the content. So psychology trumped physiology, and you opened my eyes and said, no, wait, it's actually it's both and right. And so then let me just keep on this dialogue going because there's a couple important points that I want to dig into later on. So we talked a few years ago. Then I started to get much more interested in trauma because a lot of my SEAL and military veterans were, suffering from stuff that trauma they didn't even know they had. So we obviously had combat trauma and post-traumatic stress, but then there's people who are, lives are all screwed up and they don't realize they had micro trauma, TBI trauma. And so I started to take my brain health very seriously. And I did a lot of things, electrostim, psychedelics therapy, QEEGs and different protocols to make sure, more of a preventative thing, to make sure that my brain, the physiology was going to shore up the ship, so to speak, and be there for me for the long term. Because, especially as you get into your older ages, right, it can go downhill fast. At any rate, that's kind of a backdrop just by saying I recognize that you kind of opened up my mind to the fact that the brain, that you can approach mental health and happiness from the perspective of brain health. So I'd like to start with a question like, what's changed since you wrote Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, right? Or is it just, do you just have more nuance, or what's changed in your research and your thinking?
I think so many things have changed. I wrote that initially in 1999, and
Right.
then I revised it again in 2015. And I have gone deeper into how to keep your brain healthy. So I always think of people in four big circles. What's the biology, the physical functioning of your brain? So think of that really as the hardware of your soul, or the hardware of success, or the hardware of your relationships.
Right.
There's the psychological circle, as you mentioned. There's also the social circle. We're just coming out of a pandemic,
Right.
political divide, societal unrest, war in Ukraine, the chronic stress.
Right.
And there's this spiritual circle, which is, so why the heck do you care about all of this? What is your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? And you have to get all four of those circles working together all of the time. But the foundational one is brain health. And what I've come to really integrate is integrative medicine into our 10 clinics around the country.
Right.
It's like if you have bad blood flow, you're going to really have trouble being happy. If your brain is prematurely aging, that's a problem. If you're living with inflammation, so for example, post-COVID is an inflammatory disease.
Right.
Genetics, head trauma, toxins. And what I didn't know in 1999, but certainly would learn, is as your weight goes up, the actual physical size and function of your brain goes down,
No
which would
kidding.
just scare the fat off anyone. I
Whoa.
published a study
Why is that? I'm just
two
that's
years ago on 33,000 scans, one of the largest imaging studies ever done. And there's just a linear correlation. As your weight goes up, the function of your brain, virtually everywhere in the brain, goes down. I often talk about the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. I have a mnemonic called Bright Minds. And the D in Bright Minds, so the second to the last letter, is diabetes. If you have high blood sugar or you're overweight, it's a major risk factor. Well, that one risk factor automatically means you have 6
right.
of the 11. Wow. Because being overweight decreases blood flow, it ages your brain, it increases inflammation, it stores toxins, it changes your hormones. And with 72% of Americans overweight, 42% obese, it's the biggest brain drain. And in fact, even in the military, so I don't know if you know, I was an infantry medic and
I
then
remember
I
that.
was
Right.
an Army psychiatrist.
Yeah.
It became a national security crisis because they couldn't get enough people in the military who were healthy. So they relaxed their standards, which just makes no sense. I mean, but in Iraq, they had unlimited Baskin Robbins. It's like, how does that make sense? You're a fighting force and you're going to make them stupid. It's like, oh, but they're stressed. All right, so teach them to meditate. Or not believe every stupid thing they think, or diaphragmatic breathing. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to decrease your stress, but ice cream shouldn't be one of them.
Right. No, I agree with that. Wow, that's interesting. So, why is it that increasing weight leads to decreasing brain size and capacity?
Because the fat on your body is not innocuous. It stores toxins. It decreases blood flow. And probably the most wicked of all things is fat cells produce something called inflammatory cytokines
Yep.
that damage virtually every organ in your body.
Yeah. That's fascinating because I've read about a cytokine storm, which can be triggered by a virus, like say like COVID or something like that, and then we have to it creates a lot of havoc. So you're saying that just fat itself or obesity itself creates a cytokine overload, which then has the effect of diminishing capacity. Wow, that's really interesting. So
It's motivation
right,
to get to a healthy weight.
right,
Being underweight's not good for you, but being overweight is associated with every bad thing, including cancer.
right. It's a mind, it's brain boggling, mind boggling to me that there's no more national discourse about this. And even the FDA did not change their sugar recommended standards this year in the face of just overwhelming evidence, including many people in the FDA itself recommending that we do so. What's going on there? Why is our government
Well,
so backwards?
I don't think we can trust the FDA or the CDC because too many people from industry have high level jobs from the food industry or from the pharmaceutical industry. I think people really need to
They're
be
all conflicted.
thinking
Yeah.
for themselves.
Right.
And you just have to look at the outcomes. What's the outcome? America had 4%, has 4% of the world's population and 16% of the world's COVID deaths. How does that make sense for the wealthiest country on earth? It's because we're the sickest. And did you at all hear from Washington that, I mean, we all heard we should stay home and we should get vaccinated and we should wear masks. There was nothing about you should eat better and, oh, by the way, you should exercise. I mean, the things that really prevent disaster is the health of your population.
That's right. Wow. Yeah, that's kind of sad state of affairs, but we won't dig into that in this podcast. And maybe some other time I can kind of open up that Pandora's box. How did you said you were an army doctor and psychologist. What led you to specifically into studying and like looking inside the cranial housing group with, you know, functional resonant
So
or
when I was
fMRI and
young,
QEG?
Vietnam was going on. And when I was 18, I had a low draft number and I became an infantry medic.
Okay.
And that's where I fell in love with medicine. But about a year into being an infantry medic, I realized I didn't like being shot at. Right. I
Imagine.
mean, some people like being shot
Yeah,
at.
my
Some
Navy SEAL
people,
friends and I like that because there's some restraint
some
there.
people run toward fires. For me, I'm like, no, it's hot. I think I'm not going to do that. And I got myself retrained as an X-ray technician and developed a passion for medical imaging. And as our professors used to say, how do you know unless you look? Um, and then in 1979, I'm a second year medical student. So I get out of the Army, I go to college and then medical school. And someone I loved tried to kill herself.
Oh my.
And I took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist. And I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her, that ultimately it would help her children and her grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
So I fell in love with psychiatry because I realized it has the potential to change generations of people. But I fell in love with the only medical specialty that never looks at the organ it treats. Think about that.
Right.
And and I knew it was wrong, and I knew it would change. I just had no idea I'd be part of the change. And about 10 years later, I went to my first lecture. You said you'd gotten a QEEG. Well, I took a fellowship at Harvard on QEEG, and I started to use them, and I like them a lot. We still do them at Avon Clinics.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1991, I went to a lecture on brain SPECT imaging, and I just fell in love with these 3D pictures of the brain. Because if I have your history in your scan, I become a way better doctor.
Right.
And oh, by the way, I get you to fall in love with your brain, and then your whole life gets better if your brain is better. And now we have 200,000 scans on patients from 150 countries. And the scans have just taught me so much. Like mild traumatic brain injury is a major cause of psychiatric disorders, and nobody knows about it.
Right.
How many times as a SEAL did you do a breaching exercise?
Oh, I'm with you. Tons, right? Tons of explosions, tons, even just firing an automatic weapon, right? It's a little micro trauma, and it all adds up.
It's a subconcussive blow,
Right.
which is why in the SEALs there's a high incidence of divorce and
That's right.
mental health stuff, even though they're some of the most talented people on the planet.
Right.
But you can't damage the brain repeatedly and expect people to be okay.
Right.
And these are our heroes.
Right.
I did the big NFL study at a time when the NFL was sort of lying they had a problem.
Right.
But, in retrospect, studying SEALs and studying veterans and studying firefighters is really more important because we need them so badly.
Right. They're not playing a game. What is the difference, or what do you learn from an fMRI that you don't learn from a QEEG, or how do they support each other to tell the story?
Well, we don't do fMRI, we do SPECT.
Oh, SPECT.
And
Okay, that's different.
SPECT looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how the brain works. So a quantitative EEG looks at the electrical activity in the brain. But it's sort of hard to get the signal, right? I mean, they put a cap on your head and you got to generate the signal, and it's fairly weak.
Right.
And so you don't get a great look at the deep structures in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an outside in look, where SPECT is an inside out look. We put medicine in your arm, it goes and locks into cells in your brain, and then it sends out a signal, photons, which we can measure. So the images are more sophisticated. We get a better look at like your cerebellum, which is hugely important, and the underside of the brain, which is actually where most psychiatric stuff hangs out. So at some point you should come and we should
Yeah,
look at your brain.
I would enjoy that actually. That's kind of, and it's fascinating. I don't think I distinguished between spectral imagery and fMRI. I thought they were the same thing. So thanks for clarifying that for me. Can you fMRI a brain, and what does that look like? What does that do?
Well, of course you can.
So I thought.
fMRI is not very helpful. There's a new MRI procedure called ASL, arterial spin labeling, and that looks specifically at blood flow
Okay.
in the brain. There's also DTI. There's a number of MRI based procedures. DTI looks at the white matter. So the white matter, think of it like the highways in your brain. And if you have multiple subconcussive blows, some of the highways get blown up, which are not great. There's a lot of sort of cool ways to look at the brain. But still, you have to ask yourself, why do most psychiatrists make diagnoses like they did in 1840 when Lincoln was depressed? Because still, in 2022, most psychiatrists will talk to you, will look at you, will look for symptom clusters, and then diagnose and treat you. And we are drugging America
Right.
with no biological data. And that's insane.
That is
right.
kind
I'm
of
a psychiatrist. I can diagnose insanity. And who flies blind if they don't have to?
right. Yeah. How long has it taken you to convince the medical profession that you can see dysfunctional patterns in a brain that then correlate to dysfunctional psychological behavior? Because it seems so
Well,
obvious.
I have
It seems obvious now, right? But
well, it seemed obvious to me 30 years ago.
right.
But people change slowly. In my new book, You Happier, one of the exercises is write down the 20 happiest moments of your life and then plant them around your house. So everywhere you look, you see happiness. Well, May of last year, one of those happened for me. I've been at war with my colleagues for the last 30 years because I'm like, if you don't look, you don't know. Stop lying about it. So in May, the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine, prestigious scientific body, wrote new procedure guidelines for SPECT as if I wrote them.
Oh,
In
awesome.
fact, of 10 of the authors, 5 of them had been my students. And I was so happy because it's like the tide is finally turning. People are going to start looking. And we should. I've always thought this is never about me, right? I've never made anything proprietary. I want everybody to look at the brain. And, all the Navy SEALs, they should be looking on a regular basis at their brain because ultimately it's the quality of your decisions that make you a great warfighter or not.
That's right.
And that comes from your brain.
So there's probably, there's nuance to this, right? So like if I'm a SEAL and I'm exposed to TBI and you put me under a spectral analysis, you're looking for one thing. You're not like looking for happiness factors. You're looking for like, is this brain damaged? And let's get, it's kind of like triage. Let's get it back to health. And then the next layer of nuance is what you describe in your book is like, there's different types of brains that create different types of personalities, whether they're personality disorders or functional personalities. Let's talk about the
we look
first.
for all
Let's
of
talk
it.
about the first. Like, what does a dysfunctional, damaged brain look like, and how do we get a damaged brain? Let's say, like some of my SEAL or special ops teammates. How do we get that healthy right away, or as quick as possible?
So damage is not hard to see. A healthy scan shows full, even, symmetrical activity with a lot of really healthy activity in the cerebellum, the back bottom part of the brain.
Right.
Think of it like the brain's processor. And when you damage it, you get decreased blood flow wherever the damage was. Could be left front or right back or both sides. And you see the decreased blood flow. Now, sometimes you'll see dead tissue, but mostly not. Mostly you're just seeing significant
You can
decreases.
see that from TBI?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And
Micro TBI is what I meant to say. So the small little traumas that build up.
right. Well, I actually don't like the term mild traumatic brain injury
Really?
because when you look at the scans, there is nothing mild about it.
Really? Interesting.
Now, there's obviously varying degrees, and you have to ask people 10 times whether or not they've had a brain injury. So a lot of times people go, no. And we see it on the scan. So we go, are you sure? And they go, I don't think so. Have you ever fallen out of a tree, off a fence, dove into a shallow pool? And sometimes it actually happens before they have memory. One of my patients, her mother was in the room. I'm like, do you ever have a brain injury? Because it was really clear on her scan. She goes, no, I don't think so. And then her mother started to cry and she said, you don't know this, but when you were 9 months old, your father put you on a backpack and on his motorcycle and drove out into the forest. And he thought he could get under a tree that had fallen over, forgot you were on his back. And as he bent over, your head hit the tree and knocked you out. He
Oh,
thought you were dead.
ouch.
And so sometimes we see it and the person might not even remember it. But most of the time, they'll tell us about falling out of a car, going 30 miles an hour, falling off a cliff, out of a tree. And those minor things are really not minor. Your brain is soft, about the consistency of soft butter. Your skull is really hard and has sharp, bony ridges. So you don't want to hurt it.
Right. It's fascinating. You think the human would have evolved a little bit. I mean, as protective as the brain is itself, internally you think it would have some sort of shock absorber system. Does it?
We're not like woodpeckers. So
Right.
woodpeckers have an amazing shock absorber system, and so they can bang their head over and over again, and they don't have cognitive impairment. Humans aren't like that.
Interesting. Which is why we wear helmets now when we ski and we ride motorcycles and et cetera, et cetera.
Which
Okay.
wasn't true when I was growing up.
Yeah, me neither. It's fascinating. So when you see someone who's got that blunt trauma kind of injury and it shows up in a, what's the intervention? Like, what do we do to get someone healthy?
So I always say brain health is three things: brain envy, you got to care about it. Avoid anything that hurts your brain. So if you have brain trauma, you probably should stop drinking. You probably stop smoking pot because those things damage your brain.
Hmm.
Um, Eat better. Supplements. What I did with my NFL group, I taught them about brain health, right? Three things: brain envy, got to care about it, avoid things that hurt it, do things that help it, right? So that's
Keep it
the
simple.
overview.
Right.
And, if you ask most second graders, if you give them a list of 50 things and go, good for your brain or bad for your brain, separate it. And I've done this with second graders. They get 90% right. People know what's good for your brain or bad for you. The only thing they get consistently wrong is orange juice. They put it in the good category when it belongs in the bad category. Right?
Right.
It's too much sugar.
Too much
Um,
fructose. Yeah.
and then what I did with my NFL group: high potency, high quality multiple vitamin, high dose fish oil, and a specific blend of EPA and DHA, and a brain boost that works in 6 different ways.
Hmm.
That combination, 80% of my players got better.
Wow.
I also use hyperbaric oxygen. I'm a huge fan of hyperbaric oxygen.
Hmm.
And sometimes we'll do IV therapy. Sometimes we'll do neurofeedback. Whatever I can do to get your brain healthy. But the mainstay of my protocol: get the right supplements to nourish your brain, hyperbaric oxygen.
Right. Yeah, that I want to double click on that. I've got my own hyperbaric chamber, and it's pretty extraordinary. Not everyone has the benefit of having a chamber in their house, but I think in the future you're going to find more and more of these pop up. Like our friend Dave Asprey is creating these little kind of mental health clinic or life longevity clinics. That's probably the right word. I don't know if you've talked to him recently, but they'll have a chamber
I
in
do.
there.
I just talked to him a couple of weeks ago. I
Yeah.
adore him.
And so I know he's great because he's just such a pioneer. But to be able to go around the street corner or, just a quick jaunt to a civilian place that you can get a hyperbaric chamber, an infrared sauna, hot cold pool. You do all these really cool things that we now know are extremely good for you, for your brain as well as longevity and immune system. But hyperbaric chamber. So correct me if I'm wrong. What we're talking about there is you go down, to 1.3 to 1 or 1.5 ATA, like we're diving, and then you're pressing oxygen through the plasma into your brain structures, which helps it heal. Is that right? Or reduces inflammation and accelerates healing?
All of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could actually increase the production of stem cells.
Does it?
And they're actually finding that even home chambers that go to 1.3 atmospheres are effective at healing.
Right.
Now, if you're going in a chamber, you're probably drinking less. If you're going in a chamber, you're probably eating better. You're going in a chamber.
Yeah. You're already a peak performance nut. Like
act of,
right.
Doing something good spills over so that you do other things that are good for your brain.
Yeah. So that's the integrative approach. It's not one thing. What would nutrition be like if you said, okay, there's only one thing you can do, would it be nutrition that you recommend? What's the most important thing?
If I had to put it in a hierarchy, it's nutrition first.
Yeah.
If I could get all of my patients to eat better, 30% of them would be better in a month.
That's amazing.
They actually did a study
that quickly. Like you can heal.
It happens that quickly. I did on Instagram. I do this series called Scan My Brain, where we take influencers and we do an evaluation, and then we film my part of it with them, and then we publish 15 minutes of it with, of course, their permission. And I recently did Troy Gloss, who was the third baseman for the California Angels, and he's the World Series MVP in 2002, 320 home runs. I mean, he's just an awesome person. But he was drinking way too much, and he was sad. And you could see the damage on his scan. He also had 4 concussions. His family was a mess. And he did what I asked him to do. He stopped drinking. He ate better. He took the supplements. Ended up in 2 months losing 15 pounds. I rescanned him before we started hyperbaric oxygen. His brain was dramatically better. And he was like a little kid, so excited. And, it's why I love my high-performing veterans and athletes, because they tend to do what you ask them to do.
They got the discipline to, yeah.
Yeah, they like being coached. It's like, hey, coach, tell me what to do. And I love that. So eating right, supplementing your brain. In fact, in the book, it's based on these 7 neuroscience secrets. And the first one is know your type, because everybody's different. Right. The second one is get your brain right. The third one is supplement your brain. Right. And my favorite happiness supplement is saffron. I make something called Happy Saffron, zinc, and curcumins. 24 randomized controlled trials showing to be equally effective to antidepressants to boost your mood.
Wow.
But virtually no side effects.
Where does saffron? Is that a plant?
Saffron is the world's most expensive spice. So it comes from the saffron plant.
Got it.
And Crocus sativa. You take the threads from it, crush them up, turn them into powder, and it's been shown to increase happiness, memory, sexual functioning. It's actually been good for your eyes and can help decrease snacking, of all things. And it's one of our most popular supplements, right. Mostly because I love it and talk about it all the time. Who's not stressed? Who's not sad? Who's not anxious, given what we just came out of? Right. And so supplementing the brain, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm. So let's kind of pause there on that list of seven. But when it comes to nutrition and supplementation, or fueling the brain or feeding it, I mean, it probably is helpful from the nutrition side just to look at the don'ts instead of the long list of do's. But obviously, sugar's out. We talked about sugar, alcohol, stuff like that. Caffeine probably at least severely limit it. What else should we not do? What food isn't good for our brain? Processed food, obviously, from McDonald's or anything that comes.
So processed foods, artificial dyes, artificial sweeteners, um, high glycemic, low fiber foods. We should really limit bread, pasta, potatoes, rice,
Orange
sugar.
juice.
There's a study from the Mayo Clinic where they looked at people who had fat-based diet, avocados, nuts and seeds, healthy fish, healthy oils, 42% less risk of getting Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
And they compared it to people who had a simple carbohydrate-based diet, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, sugar, 400% increased risk of getting Alzheimer's disease because it ultimately wears out your insulin's effectiveness, and you end up with this diabesity thing that I was talking about. You want to think of colorful fruits and vegetables, organic as much as you can afford, healthy protein, and don't skimp on the fat.
Right.
Because 60% of the solid weight of your brain is fat. Low fat diets go with depression.
Right. That's fascinating because once again, back to the FDA, they've been recommending the opposite for so long. It's almost like they want to keep us sick.
Well, because if they're working for industry makes more money. Big food
Right.
and big pharma. I just posted a video on TikTok. It's got 2 million views. I talked about if I was an evil ruler and I wanted to create mental illness, what would I do? I'd create American society. I'd create the fast food industry. I'd create a pill for every ill you have.
Right.
Yeah, it's just insane.
It is.
And 85% of psychiatric drugs are prescribed by non-psychiatric physicians in 10-minute office visits. So you could go to your family doctor and say, I'm not sleeping, I'm sad, and I'm anxious, and leave with a prescription for Xanax, Lexapro, and Ambien. And, once you start, and I'm not opposed to medicine, I'm just opposed to the indiscriminate use, which is what's happening in the US.
Right.
Once you start this stuff, it's hard to stop.
Right.
And I don't want to create a problem. It's, if you're anxious, let me teach you all the sort of natural things to do for anxiety first.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's amazing. So so you talked about a supplement that had saffron, zinc, and curcumin. What other supplements can people look at that are available either by you or on Amazon that are good for your brain?
So I think basics, what I tell everybody, really good omega-3 fatty acids. So for most people, that's a high quality fish oil supplement.
Right.
Know your vitamin D level. D is in Daniel. And optimize it. So you don't want to be normal, right? You or I have never wanted to be normal. We always wanted to be optimal.
Right.
And so an optimal level is like 70 or 80. Normal's between 30 to 100. We're just coming out of a pandemic, hopefully. And I want my level to be around 80 or 90.
Okay.
And then it depends on your brain type. For people who are balanced, it's a good place to start, maybe add a probiotic. For people who are spontaneous, they need something to boost energy in their brain. And so I like green tea, rhodiola, ashwagandha, ginseng for that. For the persistent people, they worry, they hold grudges, things don't go their way, they get upset. 5-HTP can help. For the sensitive people, tend to get sad. That's where saffron and SAMe can be so good. Or the cautious people, Um, GABA, magnesium, ashwagandha, theanine can be just so helpful.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And so I think that was one of the most interesting things from your book is that one size really doesn't fit all. I mean, there's kind of a foundational nutritional plan and supplementation plan, but then it gets more nuanced because your work identified that different personality profiles are really associated with different brain types, at least as they show up in your spectral imaging. Um, what was? Tell us about the aha moment where you figured that out, and what are the implications?
Well, when I first started doing scans, I was looking for the one type of depression or one type of, the one pattern for ADD. And quickly I realized there wasn't one type for any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why imaging got rejected initially, because they're like, oh, imaging doesn't correlate with the diagnostic Bible called the DSM.
Right.
And I went, well, that's why you do it, because the Bible doesn't tell you what type of depression or ADHD it is, right? Giving someone the diagnosis of depression is exactly like giving them the diagnosis of chest pain.
Right.
And nobody gets a diagnosis of chest pain because it doesn't tell you what's causing it and it doesn't tell you what to do for it. And I realized depression was the same thing. And as I was looking at different types of depression, I'm like, oh, there's also different types of personality types. Some people are balanced and most anything will make them happy. Some people have low frontal lobes and they need novelty. They need excitement. They are thrill seekers. They love surprises. And another group, their frontal lobes actually work too hard. You need to calm them down. And they hate surprises and they need routine. And anything outside of the routine would upset them. And so as I was looking, especially the spontaneous and persistent type, I'm like, you need to know someone's brain before you help them know what will make them happy.
That's fascinating. I definitely got caught up in the chicken and the egg kind of discussion. Is it the brain type that causes the personality, or is it the personality that causes the brain to look that certain way, or is it? Obviously,
It's
it
the
doesn't
brain.
matter.
No, oh, I think it's the brain.
You do.
Now, you can take a healthy brain, traumatize it,
Yeah.
and turn it into a persistent brain.
Yeah.
Or you can take a healthy brain and let that brain hit soccer balls and turn it into a spontaneous brain because you're damaging it.
Interesting.
Or you can isolate children, for example, and they're going to become more sensitive because we're a connected species. And when you disconnect people from others, they get depressed.
But don't you think like childhood conditioning could shape your brain a certain way, and then over years you can begin to reshape it because that conditioning has less and less hold on you, or you're doing meditation or therapy, and suddenly you're thinking a different way, you're training your brain a different way, and then the shape or how it shows up in the spectral imaging is going to change.
I think that's what we love most about our work. It's
Yeah.
neuroplasticity, is you're
Right.
not stuck with the brain you have. You can make
Right.
it better.
But
And I
you're
can
working
prove it.
mostly with people who have never really investigated, aren't asking those questions. They just don't know why their life is not happy.
Well, we have a really wide range of people who come to see us. About 20% don't have anything wrong. They just want to be better.
Yeah.
And when you really look, there's things wrong, but
Right.
they can be better. But still, I think 80% of people go, I hurt, help me.
Right. Right. You know what I love about you also, Dr. Amen, is that you're like me in the sense that you eat your own dog food. You walk your talk, right? You're your own client, so to speak. So tell us about your daily routine and we'll kind of wrap up. Like, what do you do every day? What's your routine, morning, evening, so that you ensure you have an optimal brain and you're going to live 120 years or 158, like Dave Asprey says.
So being authentic is my first core value. I always say if you don't live the message, you are ineffective at giving it. And
Yeah.
so, as much as I can, I try to live the message.
Right.
It always starts the night before. When I go to bed at night, I say a prayer and then I go, what went well today? So I'm setting my sleep up to be better by
Mm.
noticing what I like right before bed than what I don't like. And
Mhm.
that's a habit that has served me so well in my life. And I even think of it now like a treasure hunt. And then um, my relationship with my wife is so important to my happiness. So I make her a decaf cappuccino first thing in the morning. And
That's awesome.
I love that. We spend time together. And then I tend to do intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
So I don't eat first thing in the morning. When I have a huddle with my team, I'm usually either walking or on the bike.
Mhm.
I like to do meetings while I'm exercising.
Mhm.
And then 3 times a week, I lift weights. I do aerobic exercise every day.
Nice.
My favorite sport is table tennis.
I read
So,
that.
because you
That's
got to get
cool.
your eyes, hands, and feet all working together while you
That's
think
great
about the
brain
spin
training
on the
right
ball.
there.
Great brain training.
Yeah.
And then, I have a shake around 11 o'clock, really healthy shake. I generally have a big salad with protein for lunch. My wife has a cookbook called the Brain Warriors Way cookbook. We usually have something out of that for dinner. And I'm conscious. I make a brain healthy hot chocolate almost every night.
Nice.
Unsweetened almond milk, raw cacao, a little chocolate, stevia. It's amazing.
That
Good
sounds
for me.
delicious. Do you sell
Chocolate.
that, by the way?
I don't sell that,
You
but
should sell
I
that.
talk about that
Yeah,
recipe a lot
that's awesome.
because there's a new study with chocolate, raw cacao, better than the crap in the stores, increases stem cell production in just 2 weeks.
What?
And
Really?
so, yeah. So I'm hoping to live to 120.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. That's awesome. Yeah, well, we keep doing what we're doing, and you keep doing what you're doing, and the hyperbaric chamber. Do you have one of those, or
I
is it
do.
something? Yeah, yeah, that's
I
awesome. Me
do. And
too.
at work, we have hard chambers. And I'm just a huge fan
Yeah.
of putting your brain in a healing environment. But, the big mother habit of happiness is when you go to do something, ask yourself, is this good for my brain or bad for it?
Right.
And if you can answer that with information and love, you're going to be happier.
Yeah. 100%. I really appreciate your work, and I appreciate you for taking the time today, Dr. Amen. Your book, You Happier, uh, is out. I imagine it's out in the marketplace. Your new book.
It is. It made
Awesome.
3 bestseller lists last week. So I'm very
Incredible.
happy with how it's doing.
Congratulations. It deserves to be. So check it out. You Happier. Subtitle: The 7 Neuroscience Secrets of Feeling Good Based on Your Brain Type. And you've got your Amen clinics. You got 10 of them now, every major city, or 10 major cities here in the United States. So if you're listening and you're intrigued, then give them a call. Where else can people find you, or what's your preferred way that people kind of connect with you personally?
So amenclinics.com, or they can follow me on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. TikTok's the one that's surprised me.
God, that's so
Uh,
you have a TikTok account at 60 years old.
1.3 million
Get out of
viewers.
here. Oh man, I got to
And
start looking into that.
I discovered the secret. So you say the same thing over and over again, right? I mean,
I
you have
do.
these basic
Pretty
principles.
much, yeah.
You live, so just cut them up into 30 to 60-minute segments. I mean, who wouldn't want to hear from you on a regular basis to be inspired?
All right, we're gonna do
Um,
that. We're gonna
so
do
I would just think for you, your 100 greatest hits, and
that.
start with that.
How
And
often
I bet
do
it'll
you
blow
post
up
on TikTok?
every day.
Oh, every day. All right.
Yeah. But I work with my social media
Yeah,
director, who I
they do it. Right.
adore.
Right.
And, once or twice a week, we'll get together and record a bunch. And, you sort of see what hits and what doesn't hit. And the
That's awesome.
comments are great. And it's not just for little kids. It started that way.
Right.
It's not just for little kids. There's really, there's trash on it, but there's also
Yeah,
great stuff.
that's awesome. So how does someone? I don't know anything about TikTok. So you go there and just search for your name. Is that how you do it? And you
Hmm.
connect with you to follow.
Yeah. Download the app, search Doc Amon, and you'll find me and lots of other
Lots
things.
of other things. That's awesome. All right, Dr. Amen, thank you so much. Appreciate you, and keep charging.
Thanks,
Keep going.
Martin.
Doing
So
great
great
work.
to see you.
All right. Hoo yeah. Likewise.